Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I'm Warren Kinghorn. I'm the co-director of the Theology, Medicine, and Culture Initiative. It's my honor to address our speaker for the day. I also just want to extend my greetings as well from our work in theology, medicine, and culture, and to invite any of you who are connected to the work of healthcare who might be interested in studying with us to consider doing so. You can find information both about our residential Theology, Medicine, and Culture Fellowship and also about our hybrid certificate in theology and healthcare program at our website, tmc.divinity.duke.edu. And we would really love to invite you to consider working with us and being part of our work formally. It's my pleasure today to introduce my colleague, Dr. Alexander Martens, who's our seminar speaker for the day. Dr. Martens is Associate Professor in the Theology Department and College of Nursing at Marquette University. He's a Brazilian theologian and bioethicist, serving as Associate Professor in the Department of Theology and the College of Nursing at Marquette University in Wisconsin. His research focuses on bioethics and global health from a liberating perspective, specializing in healthcare ethics and social ethics, particularly in public health, global health, community-based approaches, and Catholic social teaching. His scholarship spans diverse areas, with his most recent books including Christology and Global Ethics, Encountering the Poor in a Pluralist Reality, and the book A Prophet to the People, Paul Farmer's Witness in Theological Ethics, published in 2003, that's co-edited with Jenny Weiss-Block and M. Therese Lysot. He's currently working on the project Bioethics from a New Lens, Foundations, Liberation, and Global Public Health, and serving as president of the Brazilian Society for Moral Theology. Dr. Martens is presenting to us today on the topic Epistemic Liberation and Ethical Challenges in Global Health, Rethinking Health Initiatives Through Liberation Theology. Alex, welcome. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
It's my pleasure, Ryan, and hello, everyone who's with us today. I'm very happy and honored to be here and share a little bit about my work and my perspective, especially what I'm going to share today is related to my most recent project, the project now I am working for my next book. So I will share some slides here now, so then can be as an assistant to help you to follow as I am speaking, especially with my Brazilian accent. So epistemic liberation and ethical challenge in a global health. So I will talk particularly from the perspective of liberation theology. And I start with these two pictures as introductions just to show, because the book you're going to see, a Paul Farmer book, probably all of you here, most of you in the call today know his work, but this was his last book, and he presented that conflict between prevention and treatment, and showing that as a false conflict, because we should work, focus on both, especially in context of outbreaks and epidemics or even pandemics. But why that conflict exists is the thing we go to discuss today, because it's the perspective of the encounter of the other, who comes from a different perspective, who are different than other. And then let's present that picture of the we call the non-candido, is an expression from the view or the worldview of the Guarani people. And I put with the word autonomy, because the concept of autonomy, it's a key concept in bioethics, but to present like the non-candido Guarani, autonomy is something else different than what a Western perspective we understand. Just this to set a little bit the stage of what I will present today, and I divide in 4 points. First one, go very quickly, just some notes of the reality, because as I'm speaking from a liberation perspective, it's crucial we have that concrete encounter with realities and people who are in those realities, particularly the poor and historical marginalized groups. Second point, I'll talk about challenge some epistemological framework from the Western perspective, then show challenge, and then present what I am calling liberation ethic and epistemic liberation, how that is, in my view, in my argument, important in our work in global health. So this is very quick notes. You probably know that, but just to refresh my mind, globally, poverty has been decreased in the last decades, very slow, but we see some progress. But with COVID pandemic, that progress stopped and poverty started to increase again. And then as you can see in the numbers, like today, according to the World Bank data from 2024, 8% of the population lives not only in poverty, but below poverty line. So, in around 3.5 billion people are in poverty. So it's a huge number, as you can see, and it's a very shocking reality when you see, and about 4 billion and a half people don't have access to essential health care. So this should shock us to know that in the moment that the world is as rich as never before, but with a lot of concentration that we never saw before of that wealthy. So here, just to show that in the graphic. So the years have decreased poverty, and then since 2019-20, poverty has increased again. That's kind of showing the same thing, how poverty has decreased especially in the last 5 years. And here it's very interesting, this graphic, and I like to show, just bring a little bit closer to us in the United States, because when you see what is most poverty and marginalization and lack of healthcare are, we see that big, like low, soft blue here, you see sub-Saharan Africa is where the most concentration of inequalities and poverty is, followed by some parts in India and South America, and not much in United States. This using the World Bank criterion of poverty, like poverty line, like $2.15 per day. However, when you adapt that to realities and income of the countries and cost of living of countries, we should see, like, for example, in the United States, that number of $2.15 per day, it's not realistic. So we have to adapt that. Then you see the number in the United States, what's poverty line will be 24.55 cents per $24 and half per day. Then you see 11% of American population, it's in poverty. That means only in a rich country as we are in the United States, we have about 30 million people in the United States in poverty, what is a very significant number. And then this graphic show the inequality. So United States today, in my home country, Brazil, for example, are among the most unequal countries in the world, where especially United States, very, very rich country, but with income and wealthy and access to healthcare, very concentrated, and people with like huge inequality. So just a little notes of reality, then have that question, is there any direct relation between poverty and health? I like to ask that questions to my students, and usually I get two answers, especially for undergrad students, right, here in the United States. And the American students say, oh, not necessarily, because poverty is not a disease. And then other people say, oh, yes, I think so, because being in poverty, don't have way to pay health insurance, and then you get sick. And the answer, the second, it's actually the more corrected, because poverty makes us more vulnerable to fall sick. And once we are sick and struggling, that we have less ability to access healthcare or even have healthcare with quality. In that sense, in the world of the globalization that has been all questioned now in terms of economic terms, what actually have been globalized in this world is poverty and injustice, and not a prosperity, health, and healthcare. That you can say that number that about almost 2 decades ago, the World Health Organization came to that macroeconomic facility and said there's the 10-90-10 reality, saying that 90% of our resources for healthcare, it's oriented to 10% of the healthcare challenge, while 90% of the healthcare challenge only receives 10% of the resources. 20 years after that, I had done some research related to that, and we're still the same. So we have no progress. We have a huge concentration of our health resources to address only the 10% of the health challenge. Most of them focus in the first world, in the global north. Uh, in that sense, I present what some scholars, especially from the global south, call a process of vulnerabilization of the world. And that process start a long time ago with Paul Farmer to say it started with the Washington Consensus. To dismantle healthcare systems around the world, to dismantle a system of social net, especially in poor countries, and create opportunities to private entrepreneurship, especially come from global north. And in that sense, that vulnerabilization of the world create more vulnerability to outbreak of disease and epidemics. And how the global north did that in a very way of colonial medicine, to trying to contain outbreaks in the countries where they appeared. And then we saw that with Ebola outbreak in 2014-16, trying to do all the actions to contain the outbreak in Africa. I was involved when I had the outbreak of Zika virus. I don't know if you remember that started in my country, Brazil, and trying to contain that. With COVID, things that containment system didn't work, perhaps because COVID came from came from China, then Italy, and from Europe, spread around the world, didn't come from necessarily from the global north, but show that vulnerability we were at that time, and we still today. But the great questions and the great ethical questions related to this is who is the other in this world of social vulnerability? Who is the poor, the oppressed, the marginalized? But more than that, who we are the other in general? Do we encounter the other in this? Do we encounter this other who suffer in vulnerability and seek in their poverty? Even, and I think I hear about the global health activities when you go to places, when you have all the best intentions. How is the encounter with the other, and who is that other? And then it comes to that the second part of my presentation, that is, and I like that sentence of Eugene Richardson from the book Epistemic Illusions. He's a professor at Harvard, and then he said the continuation of disproportionate amounts of suffering and death or infectious disease in the global south is not the result of an intricable problem through our best efforts to prevent and to cure disease. We have the means. However, an apparatus of coloniality, public health managed as a profession and maintained as academic enterprise, global health inequity. So this statement, for those involved in global health, it's very, very strong. Global health and public health in general too, because it's questioned the way we manage healthcare and health problems around the world through healthcare. And he's questioned this. Regard our good intentions to promote global health, are we promote global health, or we are just maintain the way it is, provide some palliative? And then go back to the encounter of the other, because for me, this is the first ethical questions for all our work with people. And then when you think the relationship between global north and south, I remember that first colonial encounter. And this is thing that came from my experience in Brazil. When the Portuguese arrived in Brazil in 1500s, it was friendly, the first encounter. That picture there, it's a portrait that's, of course, is not what happened. But the Portuguese, very Catholic group, when they came, and came priests with them, the first time. And the first thing they did was to celebrate a mass in the New World, right? And was friendly. But the natives of Brazil, among them the Guarani people that I mentioned in the beginning, was very friendly and curious about that new people who have a lot of clothes covering the body, think that the natives living in a tropical and hot country didn't wear much. But that first friendly encounter soon became an explorative encounter. And that encounter with the other was not the other, because the Portuguese Europeans don't want to encounter the other. They want to encounter themselves. As they don't see themselves in the new people is not necessarily a people. So that was the original, that values of they said, and then became in the reports and from the time they said those new people don't have God, they have no king, they have no law, they have no soul. Values of the European society translated in religious, politics, laws, and inner life. Therefore, a people who has no that, they are inferior. They are not like us. And that is the big question. And I remember that President Gigi, that from a Nigerian, he said the real aim of colonialism was to control people's wealth, what they produce, how they produce it, and how it was distributed to control, in other words, the entire realm of the language of real life. Colonialism imposed its control of the social production of wealth through military conquest and subsequent political dictatorship. But, and here it's my focus, its most important area of domination was the mental universe of the colonized, the control to culture and how people perceive themselves and their relationship to the world. Economic and political control can never be complete or effective without mental control. To control people's culture is to control the tools and self-definition in relationship to others. And that create that relationship that still prevails today. How one culture, one way to think seen as superior, and from that perspective meet the other. Why the other has been controlled by the mind, naturally see themselves as inferior and relate in that way, seeing the other as superior. And then this what some people like Sousa Santos, it's a sociologist from Portugal, and was professor here in the past at the University of Wisconsin Madison. He said the global north, and that's very key for us in global health, need to relearn how to engage with the others. We have to relearn to do that encounter, and when the other is genuine and other, not simply a thing that you meet because they are not like us. We don't see us on them. We see them differently and even sometimes inferior than us. And this is a key ethical challenge, and I will not develop that because the challenge of justice, it's clear for us, right? All that numbers I showed at the beginning reveal that there is injustice. Where there is injustice, that is an ethical challenge because of the failure of justice. But what sometimes is not clear for us is that challenge of the epistemic justice. And I present that epidemiologist from Brazil, Gil Servalho, that has a great work. And then go back to what Richardson said about public health as an area of knowledge, of production. They don't realize how they produce their own epidemiological knowledge, that according to Servalho, this way you promote global health and public health as disciplines and as entrepreneurial activities in global health. They produce what called they have epidemiological knowledge that tends to be hegemonic in the way to produce epidemiology, that create epistemics, other forms of knowledge, epistemic knowledge. So, and then he said the Western hegemonic epidemiology does not know the structural dimensions of oppression supported by the triple inequality of class, gender, and race. That triple inequality is part, unfortunately, the way that the encounters happen, and that prevent from a genuine encounter with the other. So the other, when you don't have that, is what that Uruguayan uh, historian and poet said, Eduardo Galeano. They call the nobodies. You know, the other that's like not us, they're not like us, and they are nobodies. And I like that poem because then the way you did, you diminish that other who are not, but could be. They don't speak language, they speak dialect. It's very common when I'm working in Africa. I ask an African person, hey, how many languages do you speak? And if he's in an English, former English colony, they say, oh, I speak English. And say, oh, really, only English? Oh, yeah, maybe some dialects. And I speak some dialect. For me, that's not language. Who say that's not a language? When in the former French colony, they'll say the same. Oh, I speak uh, French and the dialect. It never you hear the person. No, I speak five language. When if you speak five European language, you say I speak five language. You don't say five dialects. Do not have religions by superstition. They don't create art but handcraft. They don't have culture but folklore who are not human being but human resources. It's very interesting. When I remember working in Kenya, in Uganda, sorry, once I asked a Uganda person about the role in the organization, the role of Africans. And so our role here is just follow what you guys come from outside tell us to do. There is no much opportunity for us to participate in decision-making processes. Yeah, it's usually the locals is the one who do is the driver who carry the things, but it's not the people who thinking the project who lead that. In that sense, people do not have face; they have arms, and they don't have names but numbers, and that's a key element. The liberation perspective is all about see the name and the faces of those people because they are numbers. Numbers shock us at the first glance. Thousands of people die here and there, but they don't create a genuine challenge. We get used to. While we see people, we know the names, you know the story, things change. So the nobodies who are not worth the bullet that killed themselves. I think that first line, last line, it's very strong, especially in the context that Galeano wrote was the context of the civil war in El Salvador, in which the United States was provide like ammunition to the Salvadorian military dictatorship there. So lives and knowledge that matter and do not matter. So these are books that develop that idea, especially the necropolitics of Achille Bumpy, who in the past was a guest professor for a few years at Duke in the I think in the philosophy or department of political science. He's a philosopher. It's very interesting. And then lives who matter and do not matter. That go back to the first slide introduction when have that what Paul Farm called conflict between treatment and prevention. That conflict exists when you have when the situation are in a place that the lives there doesn't matter as much as in other places. Other places mean to the global north. So all that discourse of cost effectiveness, how to use resources, you don't have money, you don't have resources, so you have to focus on prevention, then you neglect care for those who are sick, and those who are sick end up dying. We don't have that, for example, when we had the pandemic in the United States and we have a situation of scarcity, we didn't have big people argue that we should neglect people who are sick now with COVID and need ventilators in order to put our resources on in the prevention. We did our best to do both together in our best capacity because the lives matter. And Paul Farm in that book will show a very sad example that when an African doctor trying to help like a U.S. volunteer in with COVID, with not COVID, sorry, with Ebola. That's context of Ebola, and he got Ebola probably from that U.S. person. So the U.S. sent a plane and lift that American white person back to U.S. You probably remember that. And she was saving, not dying, great, and leave the African doctor behind and the people who die soon. So you could put so much resources to save one person, and if you save one person, that's not the problem. But then you don't have resources to not save the other. By the way, it's from a poor country, it's black, it's from historical marginalized people. So that's what tell us the lives and knowledge who matter and do not matter. In that sense, uh, the global health challenge, you have to ask the questions about our methods. What are the most common methods of our global initiative? About the leaders. Who are the leaders of global health at international and local levels of governance? uh, and the funding. Who pays for all global health initiatives and what they at their role in those initiatives and how they control. We see all the problem with now how we are extremely vulnerable to those who funding our initiatives, and not only vulnerable because they can cut the further at any moment at the leadership or the head of one single person, or they determine what we should focus. That, for example, one of the great problems with global health, there is that false assumption that poor people die only because infectious disease and they have non-communicable disease. What is not true? 70% of all non-communicable disease death around the world is in the global south. But that's excuse because focus on infectious disease in certain extent it's cheaper, so people get excited to fund that but don't let you to do all the work. And most crucial, think about the mentality. What is the core mentality that guide our modus operandi of global health? What the mentality that guide our encounter with other people, other culture, especially those from uh, poor backgrounds and historically marginalized communities? And then when you think, for me, that is a big question. Who benefit most from the global health industry? Then the questions you can try to reflect on that question or answer. I have some intuitions who actually benefit more from the global health industry, but I will not say now. I just want you to think about. But one thing I can say, based on the experience and so who the most beneficiary of our global health industry is not the people who are saying we are helping. And then come our last part, the liberation ethics. And I start with another like anecdote. So because once I have a friend, a theologian, and have no healthcare like clinician training, and that friend told me, "Oh, I'm very excited that you can go to Haiti." That's a picture in Haiti. It was the context. I was about to leave to Haiti. That was a few years ago, like 2015, I guess. But I really want to do that, but I am a theologian. I don't have you as you a nurse and people are doctors and think I don't know what to do there, how to help. And I say, then think, you always can do something. Doesn't matter your background because the main thing is be with. Start with integrate with a community in a process of companionship, of compassion. Compassion is that passion to be with, to listen, to act together. And then from there, you can see what Gustavo Gutierrez said, the irruption of the poor in history. And then understand that the poor, the oppressed, not it have the power of promote liberation with all the difficulties, all the limitations, and all the ugliness they have as well. But only they can do that because who enjoy the status quo, they will not do it. They will not do it because the mentalities already dominate for that. And then the liberation ethics and epistemic liberation is a practice of recognition. If an ethics of recognize the other, recognize the resistance and the creativity. It's always impressed me how people in the places I had been, and even me, I came from that place as a Brazilian. I have lived so little and grew up, and I survive. And then when I see even my life today, I say, gosh, I can't survive without this. But the poor have the very creative power to resist, and that is something that should be embraced as a knowledge that contribute to our process. It's James Cone, like a great theologian here from US, talk about understand the Black experience, and then I said understand the experience of the oppressed, understand the experience of the poor, in the same way that he talks about the experience of Black communities being oppressed in the United States. And you only understand that experience being with them because it's not simply theoretical, it's an ethos. That's a movement from below. And then I think resources like the option for the poor that came from Catholic social teaching and liberation theology, that dialogical education help us to do that because help us to create a process of mutual learning. So that encounter that me have with the other start with recognition that the other has a contribution. The other has something to offer. And I have too. And then you learn from each other. And then it became like a horizontal relationship, not a vertical imposition that has been what is about colonial medicine. And then our action is for them to help them, but not a kind of thing. Now I saw in the media has said that as a good thing, but it's always question. It's not a kind of soft power. I do this in order to create a control for my own benefit, because then the relevance of the question, who benefit for that? And as Pope Francis said, focus and the preferential option for the poor is an ethical imperative. If you don't focus on the poor and the marginalized, we cannot attain the common good. The common good will be closer to a private good that some people dominate and control, and for the rest of us or the rest of the people, we just get some cramps from that table that we don't have access. The option for the poor, although it's a religious perspective or come from a religious tradition, it's an operational principle that have a secular value because it's a principle that help us to operate it, to encounter the poor, is a principle. It's not telling us what to do, but it's a principle. It's giving us a beginning, like as the French said, like a piparote, like a starting, like a kick to start. And that kick is what I said before, is from the compassion, be with the poor. And then as a conclusion, so I developed those ideas of a method from below, not offered from outside, but developed from inside. And if you're outside, that by altruistic goal to serve a community, make your best to become an inside in a process of companionship. We don't do for anybody, we do with them because we really encountered them. We don't want to find ourselves or our cultural elements in that. So then you see the challenge of reality in the face of those out there. Behind the numbers, what you say, behind those numbers of 4 billion people don't have access healthcare. That number, what means 4 billion people? We don't know what that means. We just know it's a lot, it's significantly. But when you see the face of a little representation of that, 2 or 3 people and became friends, or as Pope Francis said, became companions, that changed. That changed. Then we recognize the beauty of the others even in their suffering. So then we start to talk about poor countries as the only thing they have is the ugliness of their poverty and suffering. No. Achille Bampe, that's a philosopher, he's from Cameroon, and Koreans, a professor in South Africa. They say, we just talk about Africa as Africa, there is only wars, civil wars, and poverty and conflict, and those kind of people dying prematurely, you need to help that poor people, and forgets that's not the entire history of the African people. They have beauty, they have culture, they have knowledge. But if you're not open to encounter the other, we never see that. Then you create bridges to that mutual process that we work together. And for that, we need to be humble. And I just use that Nicolau de Cusa, the doctor of ignorance, metaphorically, because he talked about the knowledge of God. You know, he said God is so infinite that we cannot know God in his plenitude. But beyond that infinitude of God, the only thing we have to do is be humble and contemplate that wandering God. And I said that about all the knowledge that have in the world of people, the beauty, we cannot know all of them. The Western is one among them, right? With all variations as well, but it's infinite. In the front of that infinitude, that is impossible for us to capture them. We have to be humble and be wondering in front of that magnitude of beauty that are the peoples. And then instead you have a portion of humility, and then that lead us to open, to have authentic encounters with those who are not like us, who don't come from necessarily from the Western perspective, and bring them to dialogue, but dialogue in the way who they are, not domesticate them. Sometimes I feel that happened with me. Not domesticate them in the way they can be like the West, so you can hear them. But then we lost that build. Uh, and this is for me what a process to lead epistemic liberation. And then as some key takeaway from my talk is that humility, that key expressions, humility, companionship, and creativity in global health to address global poverty from below. And as you say in Guarani, Aguijé, in Portuguese, muito obrigado. So thank you for listening to me. And I look forward to hear your questions.
Thanks so much, Dr. Martins, for that talk. We do have a good bit of time for questions now, and I would invite anyone on the call either to enter a question into the chat, and I'll try to keep track of that, or to go to the React tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen and use the raised hand function. And when I see hands raised, I can call on you and ask you to unmute and turn your camera on if you would like to do so, to ask a question directly to Dr. Martins. I'll start with the first question, if that's okay, which is, so right now, thank you for your talk, and I think it gave some very helpful theological and practical principles. Right now, as we all know, we're kind of in this phase of reshuffling of what global health looks like, at least from the perspective of U.S. Foreign aid and the shape of those structures through the dismantling of USAID and reconfiguration. So I guess speaking from your perspective as a theologian and not expecting you to be a policy expert, like as like rich nations like the US recalibrate their work and thinking about contributions to global health, like what would you like to see different? You know, and in an ideal case, what would you like to see different about how the US specifically, but also other wealthy nations would go about that work?
Well, thank you. Thank you for the questions. Well, yeah, now we are in a moment that it's a lot of sad things are happening, to be very honest, in global health and other areas. And what has been done, I think, is totally evil. To be very theologically use that expression. I think it's just the structural sin intentionally going to high level because has the mentality that other, that poor, whether in Africa, that depend on PrEP doesn't matter. If they die, if they suffer, if the HIV spreads there more, and all the achievement we have, all the progress we have achieved doesn't matter because that people don't matter. Is this is the same thing. We never changed that in the deep. Always had been the bottom of the Western subconscious. But we had doing a lot of progress because some people who are beyond this could lead to good progress. However, one thing in ideas and in ideal world, I don't think we need, because the way the economic the world we need support of rich nation because we are this. There is no way to change the past. History is history, right? It is what it is. But I would like to see a form of engagement, especially when come from big, powerful nations that recognize the other. And the engagement is because the other, not because ourselves. No, and then a form of governance, a global health governance, whatever method that is from below. And then the Catholic Church talk about the principle of subsidiarity. I think that helps a little bit if you put subsidiarity as the Catholic Church present with the option for the poor together. It's any engagement has to be twofold. And one fold is the encounter with the other and do things for the other, not because that benefit us. That all the discourse now, for example, against the dismantle of ASID, people say, oh, is our form of America's soft power. Soft power is already criticized by Foucault as a form to dominate people. And because that is wrong. All you have doing the work, not because you care about those. I'm not talking about the people who go, the physician, the volunteer. We go to do the great thing, but it's inside of a structure with leaders that is doing for the benefit of the donors, the benefit of the nation country, of the rich nations. Because and then when that things create a challenge for the other don't matter. And so that's one thing, one fold is the action C. And the other fold is we have to focus on structural change. For that first fold happen, the second one need to happen is also structural change in the way our work, our support, whether money, volunteers, people, should be to empower and create independency, not to create dependency, because historically, and that's the reason it became so vulnerable. One person said, here, no money anymore, everything fell apart because never was made to create the independency. And a subsidiarity and option for the poor. Firstly, we recognize the poor, we recognize the knowledge, and we recognize their independency from their own perspective. You'll be not perfect because there is no perfection. That's how we are as a human being. So, but I think we can progress and become less vulnerable to decisions or whether a donor, a private donor, decide I will not donate. I will close all my sources for renewable energy in poor countries because I want to be in line with the new administration, or a leader, a political leader who doesn't want to do because doesn't care. Could be private or even because they're all based on their own interests and never act with the encounter of the other. The other, it's just matter for me as much as they help me, not themselves by themselves.
Thank you. We do have a chat question in the Zoom chat saying, Louisa Keefe says, thank you. I love the reality and practical aspect of your talk. Can you tell me what you teach in the College of Nursing? I'm in academia.
Oh, thank you, Luis, for the question. I teach bioethics, not theology, bioethics, but I teach in the College of in the theology department, and then I teach theological bioethics when I'm teaching for a graduate program in theology, and I teach more clinical bioethics, and also I teach a class in the College of Nursing in ethics and global health. Is an elective course that people can take, and in the less, especially with since the pandemic has become a little more popular, then people start to take more that elective course. So that's the two disciplines I like. The main disciplines, like I teach in the course College of Nurse. I teach a class in clinical ethics, and then I have a part like two weeks that I discuss issues of public and global health. And then I have an elective course that I teach once a year on ethics and global and public health. That's elective. Then it's a very nice class because the students come because they want to do. So that's a very enjoyable experience. Although my classes and my students complain sometimes, that's always a sad class in the sense it's always talk about bad news. Never had the good news.
Yeah, that's easy. Yeah, we're in a season. I get it. Yeah, thank you. Again, if you and Louise responds says, "Thank you. I wish we had you at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. So if you're interested in making another trip south, maybe she has a connection for you, Don Martins." Um, what another question I have, and I would invite again any of you who have an interest in asking a question to continue posting in the chat and to raise your hand. Several of us are always wondering, like, what are good resources for thinking about theology and global health in terms of like so you've mentioned there's obviously your work. You have referenced the recent edited work on Paul Farmer that you and Therese Lysott and Jenny Weisblock co-edited. You've given us some helpful resources in this talk, but like, who would you recommend reading for those that are specifically connecting Christian theology and global health, especially from a liberation theology perspective?
But, well, to be very frank, in English language, we don't have much beyond what I already mentioned. Uh, I I feel here in the United States, in English language, we still very much dominated in terms of ethics by clinical issues like special providers and patients relationship. That changed a little bit during the pandemic. I got a big interest on public health, but then soon I think lost momentum too, and then didn't sustain much, especially in theological areas. Uh, what I have done in other language, in Portuguese and Spanish language, have a lot things. I mentioned, like, for example, in my text, Gil Servalho. It's a great one. He's not a theologian, but he dialogue with religious traditions and theological perspectives. He's like kind of Paul Farmer because he was not technically a theologian, but have all those inspiration and dialogue with theology. Uh, there is another that I will talk about his work in the conference in a few days. His name is Márcio Fabri. So he's a theologian, a bioethicist from Brazil. And then in Brazil, we have a very strong tradition of theological ethics and global, or more public health, but expand, I have to be frank, as that language of global health is a very northern thing, you know. It became more popular beyond northern hemisphere now, but it's that in Brazil, even the language more used now, they call collective health, even instead of to give a sense of there is a collective commitment of the people and not simply like a public show, like a public face of the thing. So in Brazil, I mentioned Márcio Fabri, and then because we have a strong tradition since the end of the dictatorship, well, start during the dictatorship in Brazil in the 70s, and then in the process of health reform of the liberation theologians engage with clinicians and the movement of the health reform led by especially by physicians in Brazil, and they collaborate and still collaborating together. So have a lot of work. And in English language, I think is still things to see. Well, there is a professor that I read her book, Humanist Bioethics, from Duke. I blank her name now.
Wiley
Uh,
Wilson, that's right. Yeah.
yeah, she's again, it's more public health. She's talking about very United States, but she gives insights that can be extended beyond the context of US, because she's talking exactly the same perspective from the voice of our press community. In her case, particularly a black woman in the United States, especially. She have a lot of cases for one. It's from Alabama, from that state, and it's a new book. I just got that like less than a month ago. I just finished it, so it's a very good, and I'm very happy to see that. And then other thing is trying to see authors that don't talk necessarily either healthcare or theology, but offer resources. And I present like Achille Vampé is a Cameroon professor, and he was professor for a while for like a fellowship for a few years at Duke. All his books is published by Duke University Press. So it's had a just coincidence. I don't want to promote Duke. Well, Duke don't need my promotion. It's big by itself. So, but just say then I got connect to his talk, his perspective, and I teach in my bioethics class. His book Necropolitics is not about global health, but it's about bioethics in a broader sense, because talk about the other, how you do the other, how you control the other, and how we engage the other from his perspective as a professor from Cameroon. That will be some of my suggestions. Well, there is another professor from you, Patrick Schmidt, also has very good things uh, doing the development. Again, more focused in the US reality, but he gives also insights, because he's talk about all that perspective of marginalized communities and the experience here, and give insights that go beyond. Uh, uh, it can be very useful as a resource for realities beyond the United States.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. We have a couple of questions in the chat. I'm going to actually pose them both to you and invite you to respond to both of them as you see fit to make sure we can get to both. They're both very thoughtful. The first is from Brooke Wagon. I see a tension between wanting global North countries to continue to give money, but not wanting the global North to have control of that money. Is that what you're advocating? It seems illogical to want monetary support without interest in that support's use. It's not a theological question, I know, but more a policy question. It seems essential, however, in the context of our place in asking what the wealthy country should do and has theological aspects to it. Even if all support were given from within the church, universal, from wealthy to poor, with a cooperative approach of humility, the church giving the money would be correct in wanting a say in how the money is used. So that's the first question. And the second comes from Kim Ramsey White. I don't have a question. I only have a big thank you for giving this lecture. In the wake of the erasure of historical truths, this information is so important for students to be exposed to. I may miss the answer, so I apologize, but I wanted to hear your perspective on who benefits from the global health industry.
Very good. I'm trying to be brief, but it's very good questions and very hard to answer. The thing of we want, all that issue of give money is that we have to understand the role of money in the world. Unfortunately, the global north has the money, and especially US, because they have the dollar. During the pandemic, just to give idea, we could not buy insums. Poor countries, I was engaged in Africa country, because we don't have dollar. So the only paper they accept around the world, it's dollar. So that the poor country don't have dollar reserve, and that's most the case of African countries, cannot play in the global market, because the paper, the shillings from Kenya or other countries, it's just paper, So unfortunately, we have to take in consideration how world is. However, in all the richness, we are given one hand, but you take much more. No, so in that sense, we need, it's not giving. It's kind of like trying to give to do a reparation. But at the same time, we have to do that. The globe have to do that in an altruistic way for the other. I think that's the ethical principle I have here, because most of our work we do for ourselves, whether that's conscient or subconsciously. And of course, is all that language now that in the mainstream media is soft. America is losing a soft power as a great thing. And that's questionable. So, and then in the same, like even if it's small scale, like a church, a community, we have to trust in the other and engage with them from their own perspective and not use that money or that donation, that power to, in certain form, control. Like, for example, when we apply for a grant to do some project in global health, the donor already tell us what we can do. Not they tell you have to do that, but they create all the rules, how the grant has been, and then you have to shape our project according to what they want, otherwise you don't get anything. And then you do, basically you're doing what they wanted, not necessarily what the community most needed. Sometimes coincidentally, sometimes don't. And even when practically have a coincidence, the community locally didn't participate in that process because we did all the process to shape the wish of the donor according to that donor, and not exactly the decision-making power from the community or even from us who developed the project, because we don't have that ability to. Who benefits from the global health community? I have to be very frank. It's us. It's that talk that in the personal, because I have a very ethical, been very honest and frank, open the heart as a good Latin America for you. I have a very huge drama because who benefit most? It's me. Because let's see, I go to do a work of research in Africa or somewhere, or even in Brazil, somewhere. Brazil is a global north or global south country. Brazil is a global south country. Although the dichotomy, I agree, they have some, it's false. I just think it's a little better than, say, first and third world. Just trying to do geographic, but it's not even accurate either. But think just for my example, I go to a place, then I write a book about that place. That book give me a job. That book may get 10-year university, maybe leave me poverty, and I have a good life. While some people who participate that research field maybe get better life, but then I come back and I am here in a great university, speak to another great university, while the community that I have engaged is still struggling with poverty. You know, so there is some kind of a hypocrisy of me, of us, because the benefit for the people doing global health is minimal and it's very for immediate needs. Is not sustainable in most of the cases. But the benefit for a person like me or others who lead those initiatives or have opportunity to engage and then have opportunity to speak like in a place like that, opportunity to get a book and then you all this, you get funding, you get money, you get everything. That who is benefiting, not actually the people who actually you tell that is benefit. So that's my own drama. No, because I was born in poverty, that my dream when I was a kid was to have a bed because I slept on the floor for until I was a teenager. And then I, thanks God, met of lucky because I'm not anyway better than many of my friends who didn't make it. I just met of lucky. I have that altruistic to go, but it's so all that drama that I have it because, gosh, I talk here, I just said, and people even offer money to hear me, my experience, and all that money I get, even beside my salary that support my family, all that extra money I get, I give back to those communities, but that is nothing. I still been the most beneficial, you know. And that's what happened most of us. That happened with all of us. So I think, or you can think that in a single like me, but think that in a big picture. No, how I like sometimes that to conclude. I think the time will pass. So I think about Bill Gates, who also is the most philanthropist person in the world. Right? But he didn't want to change the structure because he gained much more extracted minerals that feed his Microsoft that make him a billionaire, right? That's red show. And then he gives some cramps that make people love him because like people, oh, Bill Gates Foundation, you give that. But he's also that work he benefit economically himself and also benefit as his own image as a good person, as a good philanthropist. But when he's pressure, like now, he's start to align to the new administration because he want that what come first, what benefit him and his company. So now he's dismantling all his philanthropy related to renew energy in poor countries because he wants to be aligned with the next will be probably his initiatives in global health. Anyways, who got most benefited? It's him and his company in a big scale, or even in my and I'm in the same perhaps I hope less evil, but in the same perspective, that hypocrisy that I feel, sorry, I get a little overexcited telling that in the sense because make a heart beat
Yeah.
faster because it's a dilemma that keep me awake sometime in the night.
Yeah. Thank you. There's lots of affirmation in the chart, Alex, for your honesty and willingness to talk us through that. So thank you for your response to that question. And thanks for giving us this talk, and thanks for being present with us and for your work and your scholarship. We're really grateful. Thank you. I would say
Oh,
to
thank
thanks.
you.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks to all of you for joining us for our final TMC seminar of the spring semester. We will return in the fall and look forward to welcoming you back at that time. Again, thanks so much to Dr. Martins for being with us. Thanks to all of you, and go in peace. Thank you.